In this message, I want to talk about the nature and the character of faith and how God works in our lives. And to do that, I want us to look at the story of three men who have been taken into exile and captivity in Babylon under the rule of the great King Nebuchadnezzar. And I want you to join with me as we see three components to real faith and true faith in our lives. We read in Daniel chapter 3, verse 1, these words. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Daniel comes after Ezekiel, and he records the story of Nebuchadnezzar here. Nebuchadnezzar was the king when Babylon defeated Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish and replaced Assyria as the dominant power in the world. And Nebuchadnezzar built great cities and great armies, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. They're located in Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Iraq. And he decides to make a giant image, 90 feet high and 8 feet wide, of solid gold and set it up in the plain of Dura, this vast plain outside the city of Babylon. He does this because he wants to make a statement. He wants to build a new nation. They have been capturing all the nations around him. And to unite them, to do that, he creates this great golden image in his likeness. See, he understands if I can get them to worship the image, I'll have control over them. Because he knows that whatever we worship will own us, will have control over our lives. So he makes this image of himself. We read in Daniel chapter 3, verse 2, these words. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all of the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Well, what's happening here with all of these strange names of these people? Well, there were 7 classes of officials that were appointed by Nebuchadnezzar, and we find those 7 classes represented here. The highest were the satraps. They were the governors of the provinces. Then there were the prefects, the military leaders. Then the governors in the individual provinces. Then there were the counselors, which was his presidential kingly cabinet. There were the treasurers over the finances. There were the justices who created the laws. There were the magistrates who passed the laws and passed judgment on the laws to the people. So he calls all of them and all of the people of all of the nations to this dedication of this great unveiling of the image of Nebuchadnezzar. It's like Oscar night, or the red carpet. He is trying to reveal his power and his authority. It reminds me of a military review in North Korea under Kim Jong-un, or as we used to see when I was growing up, the Soviet Union, where they parade the missiles and the armies in front of the people. It's this great display of power and authority. Then we find these words in verse 4. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up." Well, what's going on here? Well, first we see this repetition of words and phrases. It's a literary device of the ancient Near East to bring unity to the text, so we're going to see this throughout this passage. Secondly, he's trying to show the unity that music brings by using the different musical instruments that represent the different peoples and nations that are gathered there. And he's showing the unity of leadership by mentioning the leaders that are there over and over and over again that have been invited or commanded to attend this unveiling and this great dedication. Now, the people the nations, the languages gathered before this great image. We don't know how many people were there. It could be hundreds of thousands of people on this great flat plain of Dura outside the city of Babylon. And when they hear the sound of the music, when it starts, they fall down and worship. Because Nebuchadnezzar has said that you will be cast into a burning fiery furnace if you do not worship my image. Now, what does that all mean? Well, he had built this great furnace to melt the gold to create the image. So it's red hot, it's molten, and it's right there on the plain near the image. And he threatens the people that he'll throw them into that furnace if they don't bow down and worship. I can remember growing up in Pittsburgh, and the best job you could possibly have when you were in college was to get a job in the steel mills, J&L or U.S. Steel, and work in the steel mills. They're the best paying jobs you could possibly get. The only thing is you never wanted to be assigned to the blast furnaces, the Bessemer converters. You had to wear full asbestos suits in the middle of the steamy hot summer. And when that molten steel would come out of those furnaces and be poured into the ladles, it was so bright that I would venture to say it was the brightest thing that I've ever seen, and certainly the hottest. Well, Nebuchadnezzar has this bright, burning hot furnace set up in the desert for his people. And as soon as they heard the sound, they fell down and worshiped. But the question becomes, is that really worship? Is worship motivated by fear, being terrified, death by burning, something horrific, something indescribably painful? Is that real worship? No, it isn't. He doesn't get what real worship really is because he doesn't really know the God of creation. So he threatens the people to worship him. Let's pick up the story in Daniel 3, verse 8, where we read, "Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, 'O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image.'" Certain Chaldeans. Well, who are the Chaldeans? Well, they were the wise men, the majesty appointed by Nebuchadnezzar to give him counsel and interpret various prophecies or dreams that he might have. And they were really jealous of a man by the name of Daniel, who had been brought into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel is there, and they're jealous of him. So they say to the king, look out there. There, way out there. Do you see that? Everybody is bowing. Every knee is bent. Every back is arched in bowing to your image. But there are three men out there, way out there. You see them? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they pay no attention to you. They don't care about you. They don't serve you. They don't worship you. Now remember, one of the nations in the crowd that day was the Hebrew nation. They had been brought into captivity. Finally, when the temple was destroyed in 586 BC, Jerusalem was sacked, and they had been taking, over the years prior to that, large groups of people into captivity in Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. And one of the men who had been led into captivity with a fishhook in his nose was Ezekiel. He had no future, he had no dreams, he had no hope. We found him by the river Kivar. A contemporary of his, following shortly after him in captivity, was a man by the name of Daniel. And they're there with no hope until God arrives and speaks to them. And Daniel rises to a position of prominence in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. He's in prison, he's in exile, and one day Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And he asked the Chaldeans, the Magi, to interpret that dream, but they couldn't interpret the dream. Now, here was the trick. Nebuchadnezzar said, not only I want you to interpret the dream, but I want you to tell me what the dream was. I'm not going to tell you. So they were terrified to take a chance to tell Nebuchadnezzar what dream he had seen. And no one could do it. So Nebuchadnezzar got angry, and in desperation, he had heard of a man by the name of Daniel who was in captivity in prison. And he called Daniel, and Daniel came, and not only did he tell Nebuchadnezzar the exact details of the dream, but he told him exactly what it meant. Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed that he promotes Daniel to a position of ruler over the Magi, over the Chaldeans. And the king tells Daniel, I want you to identify certain intelligent, smart people in your nation, the Hebrew nation, and I want you to bring them to me, and I want to give them a classical Babylonian education on all of the sciences. I want to teach them our language and our literature and our science and our ways, and I want them to live in my palace complex under my authority. Now, the first thing we see in this story about how God works in our lives is that faith is an action. It is something that we do. Daniel has been appointed the head of the Magi, of the wise men. Interestingly, these are the same wise men that visit Jesus on the night of his birth. You see, years earlier, Daniel had taught the wise men about the coming one day of a great Savior, and that they should be watching for the signs in the heavens. And so generation after generation after generation, they watched the skies for the signs that Daniel told them would accompany the birth of this newborn king, and that this king would be a great king, and he would rule all of the nations. So at the time of Jesus' birth, these wise men begin to head from a rock to Bethlehem to see this king that Daniel had prophesied so long ago. Now let's step back to the story for a moment. Daniel had appointed, of those Hebrews, 3 men of the tribe of Judah. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That was their Babylonian names. And they distinguished themselves in the kingdom. And the king said they were 10 times smarter than all of the magicians and the magi and the enchanters in my kingdom. They were aware of the prophecies of Ezekiel and of Daniel as well, of why they were in exile and why their people were being punished for worshiping false gods, and that God was remaking them and restoring them so that they could return to Israel as a new people. Having said that, the Chaldeans point out to the king because they're so jealous of Daniel and his authority and of these 3 men and their prominence in the kingdom. They point out that they have not bowed down to you, O king, that they need to suffer a punishment for not obeying you. Now, here's what I think. If that were me, here's what I'm thinking. Look I can't do God any good if I'm dead, right? And this is serious stuff. There's a real furnace there. And everyone else is bowing down. And why don't I just bow down? It's only one time. It'll just take a moment, just an instant. I'll bow down. And here's the kicker. Here's what I'm thinking I'm going to do. When I bow down, I will be worshiping my God. I will be singing in my heart praises to him. I will be praying to him. So even though it looks like I'm bowing down to the image, I'm really worshiping my God. I want to make those kinds of compromises. I don't want to die. I want to be praying to my God. After all, I can't serve him if I'm dead. I'll just take this short little spiritual holiday. I'll work on this stuff later. But I know this, he who fights and runs away fights another day. Now, here I want to make a critical distinction, and that is the distinction between saving faith, which is what happens to us when we're justified, when we come to Christ. It's a one-time event. It only happens once in our life. We are born again spiritually, just as we're born physically. We trust in Christ alone for our salvation. Nothing in thy hands we bring, simply to thy cross we cling. That's justification. That's saving faith. But along with justification, saving faith, there is believing faith. That is the work of sanctification, of the living out of the faith that we believe in. We're now born again. Now we have to live our life out and become more and more conformed to the image of Jesus. It is the ongoing day-by-day activity of the Holy Spirit working about his sanctification in us. It is faith lived out. It is consequential. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego see something different. They know that behavior is always related to belief. They refuse to bow. Faith is an action. It's something that we do. You can't see faith. I mean, if you said Stu is a man of faith, how would you know that? What if you cut me open? Where would you find faith in me? Where is it? Where does it dwell? Well, you would see it in what I do. It's an action. Noah preached a sermon on faith for 125 years with a hammer and a saw before there was ever one single drop of rain. So these three men do something. They refuse to kneel and bow down. They remember the faith of their fathers, of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. They refuse to bend their knees on the basis of the promises that God made to his people. Behavior always betrays belief. They stand in the middle of uncertainty. They're captives. They're in exile in Babylon. Yet they refuse to bow to the image. Faith is an action. It is something we do. We read in verse 13, then Nebuchadnezzar in furious rage commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Nebuchadnezzar realizes there must have been some mistake, some miscommunication. You didn't get the memo. You didn't get the message. I mean, is it really true? Do you really understand what I said? Have you really heard what I said? I educated you. I trained you. I had you in my palace. Look around. I'm all powerful. Did you not hear what I said? Well, just to show you what kind of benevolent king I am, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give you a second chance to do the whole thing over again, including the musical instruments and all of the people bowing again, just for you. If you're ready, when you hear the sound of the music, fall down and worship, and all will be well and good. We'll restore things back to normal. But if not, who is the God that would deliver you out of my hand? So we read in verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. The second thing that I want us to notice about how God works in our lives and the nature and character of faith is not only is faith something we do, it's an action, but faith is also an affection. It's something that we love. We have no need to answer you, O king, because our God is able to deliver us from your fiery furnace. We have a loving God, and he will deliver us if he so chooses. We will not worship your image, which represents your values, your principles, your leadership, the culture that you're trying to create. We will not worship that. We will trust our God, and he will deliver us. But then they say this. Then they say, but if not, I mean, we realize he is able to deliver us if he so chooses. But if not, we will believe him nevertheless. Nevertheless. It's that nevertheless prayer. We will still worship him. He will still have the affection of our hearts, even if he doesn't deliver us. This is the kind of prayer that Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night before his crucifixion. He wasn't afraid of the physical pain of the cross. He came to his Father and he said, Father, if it's possible, could you spare me from drinking of the cup? What was the cup? The cup was filled with the sins of all humanity. And it was that cup that Jesus must drink before he could die on the cross to save us from all of those sins. And when he would drink it, he knew that he would become the most grotesque, horrific person that ever lived, to prepare him to make the great sacrifice for you and for me. So he prays, "Take this cup from me. Nevertheless, thy will, not mine, be done." It's the same prayer they're praying. But if not, nevertheless, but if not, we will not change the affections of our hearts. We will still love him. Divided affections are always dangerous. That's why Jesus was so concerned about what occupies our hearts and our minds, because he said, where you find your treasure, there will be your heart. Your treasure, your image will be what owns you. It will be where you place your affections. So whatever you do, don't let anything else get hold of your heart than my lordship in your lives. I love what Mother Teresa said when she was being interviewed one day, and she was asked, "How can you watch people die every day? Don't you feel like your prayers are not being answered by God?" And she said to the interviewer, "God did not call me to be successful. He called me to be faithful. By faith, I'm a Catholic. By calling, I belong to the world. But as to my heart, I belong entirely to the heart of Jesus." She knew where her affections were, whether God answered her prayers or not. Jesus says over and over and over again, be careful with your affections. Don't allow anything to have a higher place in your life than me. Be careful. Get this one right. It's the starting point of everything else. You get this right and you'll get everything right. You get this wrong and you'll get everything wrong. That's why faith is not dependent upon an answered prayer. It is dependent on being true to our affections. Our God is able to deliver us, but if not, nevertheless, he is still our God. We have a higher value. We are not willing to trade in our affections for the worship of a false God. It is our God whom we love and we serve. Okay, let's begin to wrap this up. Nebuchadnezzar in verse 19 is filled with rage. His expression changes. He can't believe that they're denying him his command and refusing to worship him, that they're still going to worship their God, even though they face the fiery furnace. So he says, fire up that furnace 7 times more than is wont, than is usual. And he orders his mighty men to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the furnace, which they do. But because the furnace is so overheated and the flames roar out of the door when they open it, the mighty men are extinguished. They're burned up. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fall into the furnace. You know, sometimes for a believer, when you are a believer, life gets 7 times harder than for a normal person. It's easy to talk the talk. It's hard to act the act, to maintain our affections for Jesus. Behavior always betrays the heart. But here, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remain true to their highest value, which is they remain true to their highest affection. In verse 24 we read, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, 'Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?' And they answered and said to the king, 'True, O king.' And he answered and said, 'But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods.' Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out here and come here.' Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of these men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. The third thing I want you to notice about how God works in our lives and the nature and character of faith is this. Faith is an action, faith is an affection, and faith is an assurance. Faith always wins. Nebuchadnezzar is astonished when he looks into the furnace. He rises up. Something's gone terribly wrong. Hey, wait a minute. Come here, all my counselors and all you people that are surrounding me, my cabinet. Hey, everybody, look in there. Did we not cast 3 men into the furnace? Come here, count with me. I see. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's a 4th person in there. There's something else in there, another being, and they're walking around in the fire, unbound, and they're not hurt. And he says, and the 4th had the appearance like the sons of God. Now, this is not Jesus walking around in here. It's in the plural. And he uses in verse 28, he tells us that it's an angel. Angels are the attendants of God. And this angel has come to be with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he says to them, come out. Now, the angel disappears, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out of the fiery furnace. It had no power over them, no power over their bodies or their hair or their cloaks. They are not harmed. They don't even smell of fire. It is unexplainable to King Nebuchadnezzar and his advisors. In the final verses, we read, verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Faith is an assurance. Faith always wins. Whether he delivered them or he didn't, they had remained true to their affections, and their actions were in accordance with the love and affections of their heart. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, blessed be your God. He breaks into a doxology. He praises God. Their faith leads him to believe in a radical transformation of who he worships as gods. Their God can be trusted, not my great gods of Babylon. He becomes a believer, and in the process, he wants to convert the whole nation. But poor Nebuchadnezzar, he tries to do that again through another threat. But if you don't worship their God, I'll tear you limb from limb. He just doesn't get it, does he? What an amazing story about how God works in our lives and the nature and character of faith. I mean, for me, I wonder when I'm facing a fiery furnace, why is this happening to me? Why this fire? Why is it so hot? How am I possibly going to survive this? Yet faith always wins. Our God is able to deliver us. But if not, our God is still our God, and we still maintain the higher value of the greatest affection of our life. Faith always wins. True faith refuses to trade in a false God for the real God, because we know that if we lose that faith in our God, we lose everything. So we remain true to our affections, but if not. Paul was like that. He writes in Philippians verse 21 of chapter 1, for me to live is Christ, and to die is to gain more of him. I mean, what can you do to this man? He's undefeatable. He's invincible. He says, if I live, I get to be with Christ, and if I die, I just get to be with him more. You can't hurt me. I'm invincible. And he lived his life that way. Now, it's probably not possible for you and me to live with the kind of faith that Paul had, but certainly it's our goal, it's our target. You and I are either walking this very moment towards God or away from God. Every time we trust him in faith, we are taking a step forward towards him in the right direction. And when we do that, we always find out that God's way is always the best way, and his path is the best path. Faith always wins. We have a God who says, trust me, I made you, I shaped you, I understand you, I am preoccupied with you this very moment. I know your unique personality, your temperament. I have your best interest in mind. Trust me, trust me, trust me. So if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knocked on your very door this moment and you opened the door and there they were, unharmed, and they came in and sat down with you in your living room and they said, we want to chat with you. Just be careful of bowing down, of kneeling to certain images that want to grab hold of your life and own you. It's a big deal. What we worship is a big deal. It's what controls our lives, determines our direction, our decisions. They would say, look, God works in our lives through faith. Faith is an action. It's something we do. Faith is an affection. It's something we love. Faith is an assurance. It's something we trust. So what's your image or your idol that you're dealing with this very moment? What is it? How have you dealt with it in the past? And how do you need to deal with it in a new way moving forward into the future? Faith is an action, something we do. It's an affection, something we love. It's an assurance, something we trust.